Good morning, good evening, good whatever time it is you're watching this. I'm Dave with Cups and Handles, and in this quick market recap, we're going to break down today's SPY price action, identify the key technical levels that matter, and discuss what I'm anticipating for the next trading session. We only have a few minutes, so let's jump right into the charts. Alright, everybody, welcome to today's recap. We're going to try to make it fairly quick, so let's jump right into it. So when we opened this morning, we pushed a very crucial level. We basically ran right to the 755.58 and we started to form a cup, and that cup ended up breaking down. Now, what I was thinking earlier this morning and why I was very hesitant to take puts up at this range, again with the 5-minute time frame, this is kind of exactly that type of range that I look to take puts into. That's called a mean reversion trade. I look for outside of the Bollingers to take calls or puts. Besides that, we had the call wall at the 757, so it was very elevated today. However, we saw the gammas shift a ton throughout the session. So as we started to pull down, the call wall pulled down to the 755, okay, which then started to narrow this range of where we can expect the dealers to basically trade for the day. And then what happened is that we fully rejected that call wall and started to push into the put wall and towards the max pain. Now, this was also a very crucial level because this is exactly where the daily 5-day moving average is at. It was at that 752, almost on the dot, which means that the upper bounds of that level is at that 754, and the lower bounds of that level is at the 750. Well, look at what happened today. We went from the 754 down to the 750, almost 750 on the dot, but not quite on the dot, but it was very close. And so what this gave me the conviction of is to say that, okay, today was a 5-mod test on the daily time frame. But because this was a 5-mod test, we tested the upper bounds of that level and we started pushing into the lower bounds of that level, which generally means that if the day is going to be bullish, we're going to see buying back upwards. Okay. Now, when we started to push underneath the call wall, or I mean this put wall here, this gave us the conviction that, okay, very likely dealers are going to try to pick up some buying in this range. So when we started to push down into this level, we looked at our nearest supports, and I don't have all of them right now, but we were first targeting this 751.30, okay? And that's actually where we started to take some of our call contracts. Once that was breached, we said, okay, our next support is at this 750. There's actually this one at the 750.20, which that's exactly where we hit. We hit that support at the 750.20, and there's that support underneath it, which we said that, okay, potentially since we're at the 750.20, we can push into this support. However, if we don't push into that support, we're very likely going to see buying. And where's that buying going to take us? Well, it's going to take us between these gamma levels. Now, the gamma shifted a lot today. Okay, it originally opened at the 757 for the call wall. The put wall stayed at that 752 the entire session. However, when we were down here in this range, and let me go ahead and shrink this a little bit, we saw the call wall actually get pushed down to the 752, which means that from a dealer standpoint, we're either going to push down very heavily below the call wall and put wall so that we can basically write puts and outweigh the calls, or we were going to see all these puts get burned and start buying up to the upside. Well, that's exactly what happened. We started to buy up to the upside, and as that buying occurred, the gamma call wall jumped back up to that 755, which told us that very likely we're going to be in between those levels. We knew that the upper bounds of the 5-day moving average was around that 754, which told us that very likely if we're going to push away from that level, we're going to be closing below this call wall, but above that daily 5 mall. So that's where I started to target a lot of my exits at. I had an original exit right in here, pulled down. I did buy some additional calls at that range, and I had the secondary exit. It was a very, very good day. It traded pretty much almost to the T of where the gamma levels were at. We saw the max pain partially get hit, but pushed away from that. Now, the reason why these gamma levels are so important is because generally the dealers want to sell high IV contracts. Okay, well, how do you do that? You get very close to these walls or even pull above them to get those very high IV contracts to trap people in those ranges. And then you pull below the actual gamma wall or above it in terms of the put wall. And we saw that on both sides. We saw that occur with the calls, and we saw that occur with the puts. And it happened very heavily with the puts. And one thing that I was talking to the stream about is that we had a ton of puts being written today. Almost the entire session was just puts being written. So what are dealers very likely to do? Well, very likely they're going to try to burn those positions. They're going to try to get calls very cheap and burn the put positions because they don't want to be exercising all those puts. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I want to kind of go over the analysis for the next few sessions, or, tomorrow's session. And to do this, let's start with the 30-minute time frame. Now, we've been talking about this bullish structure for quite a while, and we first identified it as this inverse head and shoulders. But today we had that right shoulder build, and that's something I was looking for very, very specifically. Because from that right shoulder, we start to close this cup. And we closed that cup originally this morning. So from closing that cup, what do we expect? We do expect bearish downside to create a handle. So the liquidity is set very well right now to push to the upside. In terms of the data sets, we had overall pretty good data this week. We had the CPI and PPI come in fairly cool. The core PPI month over month was a little elevated, but it wasn't elevated enough to be a major concern. So it wasn't enough to cause the market to have a major selling reaction. Now, one of the other things that we determined when we started to sell today is that the high yield corporate bonds were holding extremely strong the entire time the selling was occurring. So from a dealer standpoint, if the corporate bonds are holding strong, then usually that means that the equities are going to end up buying. So that gave us a lot of conviction to take calls pretty close to the very bottom and ride them upward. Now, where do we go from here? Okay. Depending on the TSM earnings tomorrow morning, later tonight, that could absolutely pull us back down. But very likely, what's going to happen is we're going to see the breakout of this cup and the handle. And where's that range going to take us to? Very likely the all-time highs. We're only $4 away from that range. And I think that with all the liquidity, remember, this is already a nested cup. This is a handle of a very larger cup. So we have tons of liquidity telling us that very likely this next resistance range, which is the 758.45, the all-time high, is very likely going to be the next target. So from my expectations, I'm going to be checking the gamma early in the morning, setting up the call wall, setting up the put wall, the max pain, and very likely we will be seeing the all-time high being pushed again. Trading is a skill that can last for a lifetime. Join my Patreon for live classes, my personal market analysis, premium Discord access, and direct communication with me. Invest in yourself, become a more consistent trader, and build a better future for yourself and your family. Visit patreon.com/wooksy to join today. Thank you so much, and let's return back to the video. Now, again, remember, tomorrow is going to weigh a lot on what TSMC's earnings are going to be showing us. Um, if they have a beat, if they do very well, then it's absolutely going to take that momentum and very likely push it upward towards the market. The overall SPY, I mean, and very likely pull us to the all-time highs. So that's kind of the analysis for tonight, is that overall I am expecting an all-time high to be hit either today, or not today, but tomorrow or Friday. I actually do have some dated 7:55 calls for Friday, kind of expecting that range. So unless we see a bad earnings out of TSMC, then I think it's kind of, full sails ahead. Let's get to the all-time highs. The next resistance range, again, to target will be that 758.45. Now, when we do hit that range, we do have the ability to reject it and start pulling down. So that's something we do need to be concerned about depending on where the gamma levels are for tomorrow. Now I just want to very quickly go over the daily time frame, because with us pushing out of the 5 mile today, 5 mile will be pulling up slightly, but the next level we need to target is that upper Bollinger, and I talked about this in yesterday's video. But if the market is going to target the upper Bollinger over the next, 1 to 2 sessions, then we should be seeing that 760 all the way potentially to the 762 pushed. Now, if we do get the upper Bollinger tomorrow, that means that I do kind of expect a higher high come Friday, which means that potentially we could be pushing all the way to the 766, okay, over the next few sessions. So, very, very bullish structure. And overall, when we do close this all-time high at the 758.45, what this does is this creates a large cup. Okay, now we do expect an extension above the cup because we do expect bearish structure to build. And from that bearish structure, we do expect a handle downward. Okay, so this is how we're going to continue pushing all-time highs if the market's really ready to do so. So that's kind of the analysis for today. It's a little shorter, but I am expecting quite a bit of bullishness unless we see a failure from TSMC. So with that said, I hope everyone has a great day. I hope everyone had a great trading session today, and I will be live tomorrow morning. Take care, everybody. That wraps up this market recap. If you found the analysis helpful, please take a moment to like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who would benefit from these daily market breakdowns. It really does help support the channel and allows me to continue creating free educational content for everybody. As always, have a trading plan before you enter a position, manage your risk, and remember, we're not trying to predict the market, we're trying to prepare for it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.